different aspects to it. It's not simple. A lot of people like to apply terms that make everything seem like it goes to every single country. But every single country, every different county had different things that went on. So we're going to get very specific about our times, our locations, our places, our people. And one thing that we're going to start out today with is a weapons demonstration. Now, what you're going to see is a demonstration with the longsword, with the dagger, and with the poleaxe. Certainly knights and different men-at-arms, soldiers on the battlefield, they had a lot of different weapons at their disposal. However, these three primary weapons are the ones that we do in high school, called Readerly Fetch School, or the Knightly Fight School. And what they're doing is they're performing historical depictions that have been uncovered in manuscripts. In Eastern martial arts, you have the way of fighting passed down from teacher to student, from teacher to student. So it's always survived from person to person. However, Western martial arts, or the martial arts incorporated by knights, or men-at-arms, if you will, soldiers of the medieval world, there have been books that were written, and these books have been uncovered. These manuscripts, these documents have been translated, and so to the point of today, we're able to learn and understand these manuscripts, understand these documents, so that we can recreate the art as it was. Not putting in what we think is right, not adding anything, not changing anything, but as much as possible to the historical documents. So without further ado, we're going to have a demonstration involving the longswords. And before we get into the longswords, this is what you would see typically in the 15th century. You can see the crossguard is a little bit shorter, the blade is a little bit thick, tapers down. During the second half of our program, anybody can feel free to handle this sword or that sword. They are blunted. Even though they can still hurt. But as you can see, a sword has a bit of a flex in it, and it will retain its shape. Swords were sharp. Some swords are actually a little bit more dull. This sword here is more along the lines of the 16th century. And you can see it has a bit of a recarcio. So if this sword was to come down, it would be cut from above. It would catch here on this crossguard. And if my thumb was up here, it would not get cut off. So that was a bit of an added protection. You see the crossguard's a little bit longer. And the difference between the 15th century and the 16th century in fighting styles in Germany and throughout Europe was that in the 15th century, knights had hit their apex. They had really dominated the battlefield. They made a major impact upon society. Getting into the 16th century, knights started to be lesser seen on the battlefield. They weren't so active as in society. So the combat became less deadly. It was more about sport. It was more about tournaments. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But one thing I would like to encourage all of you to do, mostly presenters, people who give programs, at the end of the program, they ask if anybody has questions. Well, I don't do that. I don't ask if you have questions at the end of the program. However, I ask if you have a question at any point during my program, to raise your hand. And as soon as I'm done talking, I'll answer your question. And I feel that this is very important because it makes this discussion what you want to hear. And it also, you don't forget the question you have. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll ask you at any point, okay? So, 15th century Germany, these gentlemen are going to put on a long sword demonstration. Now there's a lot that goes into learning the longsword, learning how to fight. If we meet together in the beginning, and you can see that I'm armored, and he is not. And so what this would be called is harness factor. If he was armored, and he was trying to defeat me in armor, that would be called harness factor, which is armored combat. But if I was unarmored, and he was unarmored as they were doing, that would be called Berufsfechten, which is unarmored fighting. So you have a bit of a different way of fighting. A sword, if he thrusts at me here, go ahead. And if he gave me a cut, he would take across the back and do it harder. And harder. It doesn't matter if the sword was sharp or not, it could not cut through metal. Nowadays, if you want to cut metal, you're going to get a saw. You're going to get a blade that can do the job. You're going to have to use different lubricants so that you continue to cut that metal. A sharp knife is basically a long sword. This blade is nice, long, and sharp. It doesn't cut through steel like you see in the movies. If you took a shot to my leg, I would be okay. Do it harder. If you would be okay. You don't have to be afraid. You have padding underneath the plate that protects the wearer. So, if we came together, if we were both unarmored, and we met, and I knew that he was weak, he wasn't pushing hard, then I could pull my blade up and point to his face and be able to thrust in. However, if we met in the middle, and he was hard in the bind, I would let him be hard. I would let him take the advantage, and I'd bring my sword back and down. So, one thing about Western martial arts is you never try to be more dominant than your opponent. You never try to apply more strength to strength, but you apply weakness to strength. And you apply strength to weakness. You use your person's own strength against them. And it was through an art. These individuals, as we're going to learn in a little bit, took years upon years to learn these arts. Now next, we're going to see a demonstration about the poleaxe. So the poleaxe is a much more formidable weapon at defeating armor. Now, this nice long spike here, this 1-foot spike, could puncture through steel. It could do damage to the wearer. Would it puncture far enough to kill the man inside? It depends how much force is behind it. But the main aspect of the poleaxe was your hammer. Now, as you can see, this has spikes on it. So you would say, why do you have spikes? Why would you call that a hammer? Well, if you had a flat surface hammer, and as you can see, my armor is rounded. And if you take a flat surface and you hit a flat surface, it's just going to glide off. It's not going to do a lot of damage. However, with these spikes, as soon as it hit the armor, it would bite into it, it'd create little dents, and all of that pressure, all of that energy would be transferred, and hopefully it would stun the knife underneath the armor long enough so that the other person can defeat him. The axe, if you would, you know that technique where you come in and you grab my leg? If you would perform that, just slowly, using the axe blade. The axe blade's a sharp weapon. So if my foot was forward, and he came forward, what he could do in essence is use that axe blade, if you'll turn that way, he could hook the metal itself and pull it up. And that's what the axe blade is mostly effective for. Other poleaxes have a nice long spike. Also can be used to push through steel, or it can be used to hook the armor again, or behind the neck, or lie down. You see, you did not have to kill the man underneath the armor in the first engagement, in the first attack. You just had to stun him long enough so that you could gain the advantage, so you can push him to the ground. So what we're going to see here now is a demonstration with the poleaxe in harness fighting, an unarmed man trying to defeat a man in armor. Now, first these will practice. They look a little bit longer than this other one here. This other one is an exact replica of an original poleaxe. What you're seeing here is what you would see in a museum, except it's not decayed and it's not behind stained glass and we get to play with it. Now the difference, the reason why this poleaxe is a little bit longer is there's a varied scope of how tall poleaxes work. You can see at the bottom of that poleaxe there's no bottom spike. It's just a plain wood, it stops right there. However, with other poleaxes, like you have on this top spike, they would put a nice big spike like that on the bottom, so that every part of the poleaxe became lethal. So let's see how a man without armor would defeat a man in armor. There you can see they're using his leverage. Sorry, I gave you a little bit of a scare there. So you can see him using leverage, being able to